These bizarre actions that he has taken, which seem so to indicate that President Putin has something over President Trump, something personal, and it might be financial. We need to see the tax returns.
The only reporter who has ever obtained the Trump tax return is Tim O'Brien, who got it because Donald Trump made the big mistake of suing Tim O'Brien. And before Donald Trump lost that lawsuit, he was forced to hand over his tax returns in the discovery process of the case. And today in Bloomberg, Tim O'Brien wrote this about the Trump tax returns. They would reveal, among other things, sensitive information about his business activities, conflicts of interest, and financial pressures that might come to bear upon him in the White House. Pressure from places like Russia, for example. And back with us for our discussion, Tim O'Brien and David Frum. So, Tim, you've seen them. You've seen the tax returns, but you are now sworn as part of the settlement of the case to not reveal things you actually saw.
Specific line items, but I can talk generally about why I think he's worried about them getting released.
Can I ask you a preliminary question? Did you see just personal tax returns or company tax returns and personal tax returns?
I just saw his personal tax returns.
Okay.
Yeah,
and for us to find everything we need to know about his business transactions, would we also have to see his corporate tax returns?
Yeah, and relevant business records. I think the goal here isn't complex. It's to see whether or not the President of the United States is beholden to anyone. And that was the question sitting over the whole Helsinki conference is, Trump goes to Europe and he begins by insulting Angela Merkel. Along the way, he undermines Theresa May, and then he goes out of his way to coddle Vladimir Putin. To the surprise of no one, I think, except Trump's apologists in the GOP and the media who've been making excuses for this behavior for over a year.
So based on what you've seen, you believe that the Trump tax returns would be very helpful explainers of the behavior that we've been watching? Absolutely,
absolutely, because there's an issue as to why he keeps making excuses for Vladimir Putin. And we know in his business history, he has sold, tens of millions of dollars worth of condos to Russian oligarchs and high-end Russian home buyers. He has done projects like the Trump Soho with business partners who are tied to organized crime. Large amounts of cash came into his business between 2006 to 2016 that still aren't really well accounted for.
How many years of tax returns did you see?
I saw several. I can't remember exactly
what
how many.
years did they cover?
The 90s to the mid-2000s.
And even there, do you believe back then there were influences in his financial life that would help explain things we see today?
I think Donald Trump has a long history of associating with people of questionable backgrounds and murky finances. Yes.
It's fun watching your face when I'm getting close to what you can't say. David Frum, you said today, you tweeted today, at this point, disclosure of Trump's tax returns has become a crucial national security counterintelligence concern.
Well, first, I have to say, I can't imagine what it's like to be Tim O'Brien. He's like the guy in the horror movie who can see the ghosts that no one else can see. It must be very spooky and unworldly to be him. But as Tim was sort of indicating to us, he didn't say this, but he was indicating it, that this is no longer about one businessman's criminality or one businessman's ethical misconduct. We can all see the points of pressure that Vladimir Putin has. Or to switch the analogy, we can all see the iron filings moving on top of the table. So we know there's got to be a magnet down there somewhere. But how do we find out what the magnet is? Again, as Tim was suggesting, and as you were suggesting, the personal tax returns may not tell the whole of the story, but they probably tell enough to get Americans, to alert Americans to how is their president making his decisions.
And Tim, we do know that he ran out of financing in New York and in the world that knew him. He ended up, we discovered, doing a lot of financing through Deutsche Bank. And is that possibly a rich area of information on Trump?
It's the crucial area. After he almost went belly up in the early 90s, most major commercial banks in the United States would not lend to him because he was toxic. He was a black hole for commercial loans. He ended up with Deutsche Bank. He sued them in the mid-2000s. And then there's this period where he goes on this spree of buying golf courses that aren't necessarily great business propositions for what he and his son say is cash. But they've never really accounted for where that cash came from. And I think that's why that moment at the end of the
So suddenly, the guy who couldn't buy anything without a loan, and a big loan, is out there.
And always preferred debt to cash
and
anyway.
never wanted to use his own money, is
Right.
suddenly out there using large amounts of cash that in any accounting we knew prior to that moment didn't exist.
At least about $400 million or so.
And one thing to add about the golf course, the Scotsman reported just today that the U.S. taxpayer paid 50,000 British pounds to cover Trump's costs staying at his own Turnberry golf course over the weekend when he was waiting to meet with Vladimir Putin.
David Frum gets the last word on the tax returns tonight. David Frum and Tim O'Brien, thank you both for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.